You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and lovely to have you all along again for Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. It's a New England show today with Connecticut and mainly Vermont featured, purely accidentally in each section. Funnily enough, the main guest, Silvia Cassano, or Momma Sil, was recorded in February last year. Silvia has spent much of her life in Vermont and has been a great advocate for all things trail. I knew I had a recording of Silvia somewhere and I'd lost it. Then earlier this week, as I was sorting out one or two files, I realised where it was and went straight to it and decided that this would be a perfect episode for today. Remember, this was done prior to my 2019 thru-hike, and I was interested to see if some of my pre-hike thoughts were as solid as I'd presumed them to be. I'm going to let you be the judge of that. Silvia will be along soon, and while I remember, I was living at the time annoyingly close to a road, so the editing has been an utter nightmare. But the sound isn't bad now, even though you can hear the odd car rooming past from time to time. And irony of ironies, the second guest, Jess Treat, has a home in Sheffield, Vermont, and that is where I stayed both this year and in 2014. Silvia, in my first interview, even mentions Jess and her home. You just can't make this stuff up. Finally, Paul Stutzman is also in Vermont, heading to those last two great states of New Hampshire and Maine. Unfortunately for me, he meets up again with Fargo, so my crappy Fargo accent had to be dusted down again. Oh well. Actually, while I'm talking about Paul Stutzman, as I said I would last week, I went to meet him in Sarasota near me the day that last week's episode dropped. What a charming and humble man. He's actually staying nearby for a couple of months and agreed to come on the show to talk about his journey after I finished reading his book. So that'll be a treat for us all. So now it's Silvia Cassano, or Momma Sil. Silvia speaks in something of a stream of consciousness, it must be said, and gloriously she confesses to being a touch opinionated. But her views are definitely relevant, and she will certainly strike a chord with many of you. Here's Silvia Cassano, or Mother Sil. Now, to all our listeners out there, I don't know if you recall an episode just after the 100 mark. It was about a guy named Will Ransom and his dog Redder. Great guy he was, and his dog was so well behaved. Will told me, and not as part of the interview, but later, he told me that he'd received a lot of help from today's guest, Silvia Cassano. Hi, Silvia. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, this is going to really ruin the question if you don't remember Will, but do you remember Will and Retta?
Do I remember them?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Thank God for that. Tell me about that. Tell me about meeting them. Where did you meet them?
It's a little bit foggy on the what time of year, but I feel like it was in the fall.
Yes,
and a lot of hikers that I normally I'm in touch with were kind of getting done. And I believe it was a text message, maybe. They needed a ride from a couple rides, I believe, from Manchester, from where they were staying in Manchester, Vermont,
right,
down to like a trailhead that's kind of halfway between Manchester and Bennington. And then I believe Will finished his thru-hike in Bennington, which is my hometown, which is where I am at this moment in time.
Yeah, right. He did. You're absolutely right. Yes, that was pretty cool. And I'm glad you remembered, by the way.
Well, and I always love too, if, a lot of times the hikers that I'm meeting that are either section hiking or through hiking, they aren't necessarily finishing here. So I like to, make sure it's a positive experience because it's, Bennington isn't necessarily a highlight spot destiny. I think it is, but a hiker might.
I think it's a lovely spot, and I remember going through. Well, you don't actually. Do you actually go? You don't go through Bennington, do you? If the trail passes nearby.
It does. It passes nearby, but you do look out over Bennington in one section of the Long Trail, Appalachian Trail, and then it's about 4 or 5 miles east of town.
Yeah, I went in there. I absolutely loved it there. I really did.
Yeah.
And when Will told me about you, he said that you were a true trail angel to him. But when I reached out to you, you downplayed it a little. Yeah, I've read what you have sent me, and you certainly contribute a lot to the trail and to hikers. Give us a potted version of your involvement in hiking and how you got to know about the AT.
A what version?
Well, I said a potted version, but it's okay.
Oh, potted version.
Yeah.
I haven't
sorry,
read that.
Sorry, I'm trying to speak English. I know it doesn't work very well.
No. It's good. That's what I gathered. But
I know.
Right. So I grew up here in southwestern Vermont in Bennington. And at some point when I returned from college in Maine, in Orono, Maine, I studied parks, recreation, and tourism, which I feel like I probably should have paired that with a minor in like business or something that would pair well. But so in my quest for work after I finished an environmental education AmeriCorps, I happened upon a job with the Mass DCR, which is Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation. So they manage the state parks in Mass. They manage the state forests. So they have 2 positions usually on the Appalachian Trail in the Berkshires. So in Western Mass, Appalachian Trail Ridge Runner. So I actually, even though I grew up in Bennington and the Long Trail, so here it's the Long Trail, but
yes, isn't that interesting?
Been the Long Trail. Well, it's been the Long Trail longer than the Appalachian Trail, so it depends on who you're talking to, what you call it. Sometimes I'll say LT, AT. I have to remember to put the LT first because around some people, if you were alphabetical, like I like to be AT, LT. If you were to say that around certain volunteers, sometimes they actually get. Like you can kind of tell they're a little offended that you didn't put the LT first. So I have to it just depends. Like I don't take too much offense if I say it the wrong way. But anyway, so I was a ridge runner on the Appalachian Trail for a season in the Berkshires. And my only exposure to it was, I hiked Bromley a lot, which is still the Long Trail and the Appalachian Trail. And I've hiked up Harmon Hill, which in high school on the Nordic ski team, so the cross-country ski team, they used to have us for dry land training before it snowed. We hiked up that as fast as we could in high school for a Nordic ski team. And those are that's the only time I've ever really had been on the Appalachian Trail and have known it. I feel like I hiked up it when I used to hike up Greylock.
Right. Yeah.
But my first real taste of it and like understanding the overnight shelters and visitor use and everything was when I was a ridge runner fresh out of college.
I'm going to come back to the ridge run thing in a minute. I'm actually going to go over all the various jobs you've done. But so your involvement was somewhat limited when you were younger. Then I heard you say and maybe I missed it. Something you did environmental studies when you were in AmeriCorps, was it?
I did an AmeriCorps right out of college in environmental education and recreation up in northeastern Vermont. And, after that, you're like, well, I still don't know what I want to do with life, so I need to kind of find some job. So that was kind of...
that old chestnut, yeah.
That was, I was like, well, this is better than, I'll have a job for 4 months, so I'll try this.
Yeah, nice.
And so I felt like I was using what I learned in college.
Yeah, darn right.
I still also felt like I'm still just this person here briefly. So what can I really do in the grand scheme of things? But kind of got a good taste of what it was like. And then I ended up working with some of those same people later on as well. Yeah. So
cool. So in the email that you sent me, and I found this really interesting, you said that you preferred connecting with section hikers than through hikers because they plan better for the most part, and that must be true because once you're in Vermont, especially if you started in Georgia, once you're in Vermont, planning has gone totally out the window. It's gone out the window before you even leave Georgia. So, and I found that interesting, as I say. I wondered if you've noted other aspects of section hikers as opposed to through hikers that differentiate them.
I don't want to make anyone upset by my feelings. And
oh, please knock yourself out. Go on.
No, I guess I am not a taxi or I can be a trail angel. When someone came through Bennington and she actually broke her ankle coming down the 200 steps, and I saw her at the hospital and I felt terrible because she was like, Bennington, blah. So I brought her maple creamy, which is soft serve. Try to leave her with a positive note. But in general, I do provide rides to people. And how do you get around in a rural community where there is a bus that goes by the trailhead, but that's just one trailhead? So how do you, so I'm on the shuttle driver list. I am in a few other spots. I don't do it all the time. I might fit it in before I go to work. I might try to do it after work. I might say, no, I'm not available. Try this person, or this person's not listed. So I kind of feel like I'm someone's trip planner, which is what I've done in a way in some of my other jobs. I'm like helping you get your trip done. But section hikers, when they're in this area, they tend to, like, I see them more, they might come here 1 year and then I'll see them the next year because they didn't, they still have another section to finish. And so I get to know them a little better. But in general, I'd say a majority of the people that I've come in touch with and drove around, had some time in the car with, a little bit of time on the trail with, they've been trying to finish, most of them, the Appalachian Trail. Some of them are starting the long trail or finishing the long trail. And they've had to take time off from work usually, or they're just retired, or they're in between jobs, those three kind of things that happen, which allow you to go hiking. So
you sound like you don't want to answer the question about the thru hikers.
Well, they just have this finite amount of time. So they generally I know I need to go from here to here and I have this much time, and they know their pace and they've thought it out. Yeah. Occasionally there's some people that really have really high expectations and don't understand that certain trails are only good in winter and I'm not going to drive them to those trails. And they have they haven't been hiking as much. So I try to help them as much as I can understand, what they can do. But sometimes you'll get, people want a winter hike and there's less trails to go to and access in winter. But the thru hikers that do contact me, since I am also in, I think he added me to that got hooked, but I get some last minute texts. I get a random text from thru hikers. Hey, can you take me to Walmart? I'm like, no, I'm working. No, there's a bus. Well,
yeah,
busy.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. I know that a lot of thru hikers seem to get some bad press sometimes, but I just thought it was interesting that you prefer to deal with the section hikers. And I suppose
it's more, yeah.
It's more. I'm sure it's more convenient. I'm sure they're more. I'm sure they're more respectful of your time and so on. But I'm just wondering. I'm wondering, is there a change going on? Is there, are you observing other changes? Because if you've done this for a few years, are there a bunch of changes going on with hikers in general?
So I will say that a lot of the thru hikers, especially Will and his hiking partner, whose name I should remember right now.
The dog was Retta.
The dog, I know Retta, but there's another guy from Colorado.
All right.
I love connecting with thru hikers, and a lot of them are really respectful and definitely okay, it's okay if you're not here in an hour, that's fine. I'll hang out. I've got all day, So
sure.
So there is that, but just in general, I'm the kind of person that I need to be active all the time. So if I'm waiting around for you because you might show up at this trailhead at this time, I might be able to be on my bike somewhere riding it, or might be able to be doing my errands, or I might be going out with people somewhere, so.
Well, you mean you got a life?
Yeah. So in terms
exactly.
of right. So in terms of planning on my end, if I'm going to be helping people get from a trailhead to a trailhead, or, getting around town or random, I had to help a couple guys one year. Something happened and he was in the emergency room till like 9 at night and the pharmacy closes at 8. So I had to help them find a place to camp out because I can't where I live right now, I can sort of let people camp out, but then I have to bring them 4 miles into town and I work the opposite direction. So I helped them find there's a powwow going on at the veterans home that weekend. And I was like, go camp out at the powwow, even though you have to pay. Their theme is like world love and peace or whatever the theme was that year. And I was like, if anyone gives you a hard time, just tell them about what you're doing and that you're trying to get to the pharmacy for your medicine. So like I have done some random stuff like that too.
I stayed at a place owned by somebody called Jess Treat, I think her name was. I don't know whether that's still open.
Well, that's in Sheffield. That's down in the Berkshires.
That's right.
I lived there.
Yeah. Oh, right.
I lived at Jess's house.
Oh, really? How nice.
I really did. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Very interesting.
In a room.
So since we're talking to somebody who's been referred to as a trail angel, you made a comment in your email, another one that really made me smile a little, and I knew where you're coming from. And you said that you're a bit of a purist about the definition of trail magic. And you specifically mentioned hiker feeds. What does trail magic mean to you?
So I think I didn't fully answer your last question. So I'll try to tie that last question into my answer for this question, because you asked me if things are changing with hikers.
Yes.
Right?
I did.
So, okay.
I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I promise you.
No. I just want to answer it. So I worked for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy for 3 long seasons. So April through late November, sometimes till Christmas, down in the Berkshires, which is why I lived in Sheffield, Mass. Mm-hmm. And in South Egremont, where the field office, now it was in South Egremont, and that's changing right now. But what I noticed in being involved with the trail, and again for 3 years in a different level, is different things than I had seen when I was a ridge runner, and then different things in my time out west. So trail magic, have you heard of or seen that documentary about Grandma Gatewood?
I've seen something about her once, yes. And I was going to come to that. You hosted something. I'm going to come to that in a minute. But Grandma Gatewood story.
If you get the chance to watch the documentary, I think they sell it on DVD now. I met Peter, I think his last name's Hudson, who they have this wonderful documentary on Grandma Gatewood and the trail in the beginning, which obviously the Appalachian Trail then and now is very different. But she, and not everybody's going to stay at this, and it went along a lot of roads. And so sure. What I noticed working in the Berkshires, where there is a big stretch where there is no water, from Gilder Pond down to the Tom Leonard shelter, there's not water unless you stop at this place on Route 7 and ask them nicely to fill your water with a hose, or if you stop at the Kellogg Conservation Center, which it was the ATC field office, and now it's going to be home of the Green Agers, which is a nonprofit in the Berkshires that's doing good things. They have a hose too, but usually when hikers, because I lived there for 1 year in the historic home, my last season in 2015, and the first thing that people ask for now versus in 2008 or 9 when I was ridge running is, where can I charge my phone? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where can I charge my phone? Then they're like, oh, is there water in a bathroom? And it just I get it, but and then there's people who want to connect with their family in the Berkshires. There's a lot of trailhead crossing, so there's great ways to do that. Sure. But when you hike up, we had a North Adams Appalachian Trail community celebration, and each designated AT community kind of has their own thing. So Great Barrington, I think it'll be in their 5th year this year. They have a nice community picnic, and it's sort of evolved, but it's 0.5 off the side trail. So hikers can come and they're allowed to spend the night there if they partake. Normally they can't camp in this picnic area because it's a picnic area and the campground's usually full because it's so small. But they're having it off the trail, but I found when I was working and doing like boundary work, or we were hiking in to do overnight site maintenance or whatever, was like, all right, there's someone waiting. And this happens at my work. We did it this year for someone that took sabbatical to hike the AT. Like, you meet them at the trailhead and you feel like you need to help. So you bring all this food, and like every trailhead has food. And I know it's a big problem down in the South more so, but we're just seeing it more this way. And people think that they're helping. So it's fine when they're there, but like when they leave it and they leave stuff, like I leave a crate for someone to sit on because they apparently don't sit on the ground the whole time they're hiking, or like there's a bucket they left for someone to sit on, but now the bucket is full of everyone's garbage. When you go to the Stratton Pond trailhead and someone left a cooler of popsicles when it's 90 degrees and no one ate them because they melted, it just becomes garbage. And there's certain things that really bother me, and it's like leaving stuff.
I can understand that, and I suspect you're probably cursing me for asking you some of these questions, but...
No, it's fine. I'm very opinionated on this topic.
Really?
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of wondering, do you think that these feeds are in some way... I mean, you talked about how it's different. We know it's different. I think the arrival of the smartphone must have made a huge difference to the trail. I'm sure all these different augmentations to the ability of the hikers to get on the trail. There's much more access to the trail, and much easier access to the trail because of lightweight packs, because of technology and so on. Do you think these feeds are coddling hikers in some way? And do you think that's a bad thing, or is it you're saying that the stuff that say people leave behind, that's the bad thing?
I feel like because there are more people doing it, that because it's more common, it kind of takes away from like, I mean, if I'm crossing the trail in Great Barrington, I can go to town, right? So why do I need people there with Berg? Or like, I get that it's free. You're on a budget when you're hiking. I totally lived the like, I still kind of live the dirtbag lifestyle. There's free food. I'm like, I'm gonna eat it, but it's a really hard balance. It's because I have the stewardship background, and I understand that AT is a very social trail, and it's very important for these people that are offering the food and catching up with hikers. Like, I think at the more remote trailheads, it sort of bothers me. I think the ones that are close to town maybe don't bother me as much. I just still think they're kind of like, it's so close to town. Why? Like if someone's there monitoring it and it's close to town, great. But it's like, if you leave a cooler of stuff, and you can literally, this happened in Northern Connecticut, like I could see town and that someone just like left a cooler, and they don't understand that cooler is actually not like, it's on the Park Service land, but it's still kind of like on someone's private property. And there might be beginner hiker. I don't know. I struggle with this.
You are, I can tell. I can tell you're struggling with it. It's difficult because, all I can say to you is the people I've met on the trail, and literally every person I met was respectful to everybody else around them. And I hear so much crap on Facebook that it's you think there's a band of cutthroats going up from south to north, and hopefully that isn't. Hopefully, in the 5 years since I was on the trail, I'm hiking again this year, leaving in a couple of weeks' time.
Right.
And I'm hoping that is not. It hasn't changed so much in those 5 years, and I'm looking forward to enjoying it and sharing the time and the trail with my fellow hikers. That's what it's all about, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So I will be disappointed if people are becoming more and more entitled. So I know you didn't use the word, but I've heard that word entitled so much, and I just wonder whether people, when they go out there, they're expecting too much.
The trail magic term to me, when it involves food, and people are telling people about it, like that's not trail magic because you know about it and you've been telling people about it. Like it's not really magical, or, like if you expect food at every road crossing, great, but maybe you should plan ahead and buy some food. But I'm definitely having also been a wilderness ranger, like the more north you go, the more it bothers me if people are bringing in food or leaving food caches. Like there's the whole thing in the North Maine woods. I think there's always going to be some hikers out there that expect a little more than some people are going to give them. But I think one of the things that was a good example is when I worked in Great Barrington with the Great Barrington AT community, we worked with their community center, which is kind of like a YMCA. And they have these tent platforms, but they have this big grass lawn, okay? And they have showers, and they're offering, I think it was free or by donation showers. They were even going to provide like the soap and like the shampoo.
Yeah.
But the hikers, because in that area, the hotels they offer hiker discounts, but in reality, during peak summer season, it's still not the best situation. There's not as many hiker friendly or innovative hotels that, offer like a bunk room like the woman Sonu does in Paris. I think it's in Parisburg. So some of the hikers were like, oh, I camped out in the lawn at the community center. And I was like, look, like we spelled out the guidelines, and I get that you're trying to like resupply on food, but like by people doing that, it could actually like the community center might just cancel that whole program, and then it's not open for anyone. And the same thing happened. I agree.
Down. Now that sort of stuff does worry me.
Because they think they can get away with it.
Exactly.
That's annoying.
If people flout the rules, then there needs to be, and it's difficult to say what penalty there could be, but people need to respect whatever the rules are. They need to be respected to make sure that this stays open. This stays open for people. And actually, I wanted to talk about some of those things. So you've mentioned the various jobs you did. You were a wilderness ranger, you say. Where actually were you, and how different is that to being an AT Ridge runner?
I would have loved to have done it for more seasons, but I tore my ACL, which is very challenging to hike with a knee that doesn't move. So I did that in the Sierra Nevada in the Carson Iceberg Wilderness along kind of on the Nevada border north. Technically, my district went up to Mount Rose. Most of the time I was between Colville, California and like Walker. So the eastern side of between Sonora and Ebbets Pass. Nice. And then the role was to monitor the wilderness campsites, like continue a second year study of the concentration of the campsites and the fire rings and like counting the visitors.
Is that similar though to being an AT Ridge runner? I mean, is that similar sort of thing just in a different location?
No, some days the only people I saw were down in the valley and they were on horses. And like, I think the most people I saw in a day out there was like 3, because that district, unlike the Inyo National Forest, which is regulated by permit, where I also had worked, the Carson Iceberg is, at the time a wilderness permit was suggested but not required. So I'd have to convince people to fill it out. So we had data to know how many people actually went backpacking or horsepacking or fishing. The trail in New England that I worked on primarily is in Connecticut up to southern Vermont. You stay at the overnight sites because the corridor is really narrow in certain spots, and people just don't get that. So, and then in Vermont, once you get on national forest, it's more similar to where I was working in terms of, because it goes in and out of wilderness areas. So, you can, camp theoretically 100 to 200 feet off the trail, which, most people don't, because, why would you do that? That's really hard.
Why would you do that? Yeah, no.
A lot of the campsites along the trail in Vermont are like really close to the trail. People don't try very hard. So out in the Sierra, like there definitely are campsites where I was along the trail, but some of them you really had to work for, and they were probably the coolest ones.
So you were also, I see here, you were an ATC trail management assistant. Did that involve trail maintaining yourself, or were you more of a management role, or did you actually do trail maintaining?
That was working a lot with the volunteer clubs. So the Connecticut Appalachian Trail Committee, which is a group of the Appalachian Mountain Club, a division of that, and the Massachusetts Appalachian Trail Committee, which again is a branch of the Appalachian Mountain Club. And then a bit with the Green Mountain Club, which maintains the LTAT in Vermont. But it was anything from like I helped fix the roof on the Upper Goose Pond cabin. I've tipped a lot of privies. I'd stirred a lot of poo. I've
Nice.
packed out garbage. I've worked on property that the ATC owns. I led walks for the seniors.
I once saw in a privy somewhere, it said, "Please be prepared to disturb the fecal cone."
Oh,
if it requires it. What a great expression that was. I never thought I'd be able to use that again.
That must have either been a high use site or one without a volunteer.
Oh dear, how awful. And talking about volunteers and maintaining the trail, it seems to be an aging demographic from what I understand. How do you think younger people could be encouraged to join in, or do you see actually some of the youngsters joining in terms of trail maintaining?
My involvement in the past few years has been less of the Appalachian Trail, just because I'm on a board in town here that's more like community trails. But with the Green Mountain Club, with the involvement, our section down here is definitely older. There's some younger folks that come in and out, but this is definitely like a whole, like all these organizations talk about, this all the time. And how do you increase the volunteer pool and have it be more diverse and more ages? But inevitably, like when people have families, you don't see them as much. But the Mass AT committee seems to have a few newer volunteers. I missed the volunteer gathering, but so the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, it's the Park Service, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and the clubs, so the three-legged stool. But I feel like sometimes the clubs are so involved with discussing strategy, but I think sometimes there might need extra help, like getting the word out about either events or...
Sure.
They seem to be doing a good job, but like our chapter here in Southern Vermont, so every chapter of the Green Mountain Club is a little different, but our group seems to be, they like to hike together. They've known each other for a long time. There's some new people coming in. A few of them, don't have families, but they've been friends for a long time. A lot of them know all these areas that, I know how to get into a lot of these shelters the back doorway, but for Vermont, the Long Trail, like I'm still trying to learn a few of the back ways into a couple places and, learn from these folks and just try to get more people involved in the community. And like I went somewhere recently because I've been involved with a side trail that's been getting work. So like a side trail up to the Glastonbury Fire Tower. It's pretty long, but you could make a loop out of it. But the beginning, one of the options starts in town from a sidewalk, and it goes into the wilderness, the Glastonbury Wilderness, which is pretty unique in Vermont. And just by my involvement with that, like I went somewhere and like my work ID was in my wallet and my name was sticking out, and whoever I was paying was like, "Oh, you're involved with the Green Mountain Club." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know how you know that," but it's because of the work we've been doing. Because I've also done a lot with hosting events in kind of the forestry community and environmental ed community in this area. So I think just people are now like starting to like realize what's here, and we have an economic kind of collaborative group working on recreation in this area in Vermont. So
it's good to get more and more younger people involved, I'm sure, in not only the hiking itself, but the maintaining the hiking as well. And really from that perspective, where do you see the future of the trail? And I'm including the long trail here. Where do you see the future of these trails? Is it good hands right now, in your opinion, or is it does it still need a lot of work and a different direction?
Will actually sent me a whole box of pecans from Georgia. The same day I got Appalachian Trail, their AT Journeys in the mail, or you can get it online. But I need to read about their new initiative involving the trail here on the East Coast. The name of what it is
called Wild East, isn't it? The new
Wild
initiative.
East. Yeah. I need to read about it, but I think that is a good way to get people aware of like the trail is a big corridor as well. And
it's more than just the trail itself, isn't it? There's the corridor either side, yeah.
Right. And so one of the things there's monitoring the rare plants. There's the corridor that's huge. There's a lot of boundary. So in New England, because the soil and the weather has been changing, and I call this a winter, the emotional winter, because it's freezing, then it dumps a ton of snow, then it rains, and that's probably doing a lot of damage, the freeze-thaw cycles on the trails, and then the intense rain events we get. So there's been an effort with the New England, the past 5 years to the New England office of the ATC, just to get people aware of, like, we don't have soil here and these weather events are happening, and there's going to be more infrastructure, like there's going to be more drainage issues and, relocation is, you might not be able to relocate the trail in some spots. So how can you be proactive about something might cause damage?
Yes.
But then the other thing we are seeing is the increased use. So how do the clubs manage more interest, and are there other areas off the trail that can absorb some of this? Or if not, how do you get group, especially like the group, having that community outreach person from these clubs, I think is really important. And that might help get more people aware of like group sizes, or like, I don't have to there's trail work I can do. Oh, all I have to do is carry in this bark mulch. Like, that's helping. Like, that could be something easy for someone to do.
Right.
The things that might need to happen aren't necessarily all really hard physical labor. However, a lot of it can be. In Connecticut, if you like mowing things, there's a lot of open areas to mow. It's not all.
But do you think these things there's an awareness now of the importance of conservation, and I know the Kellogg Conservation Centre, which I know you're involved in as well, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes to that you sent me on that. Do you think this awareness of conservation is going to be ultimately result in helping the trail in a big way?
I hope so, and I think I said that really quite like it sounded doubtful, but I think that
yeah, try it again.
I'm a big proponent of education, helping people understand the resource, because I studied interpretation. So like, you'd go to a park and someone's talking to you about why you need to care about this.
Sure.
Like that is something that I have trained to do, and like I feel very strongly about. And in some cases, it is really hard to get people actually out on the trail, which is why sometimes some of these events, like in Manchester, since they've become a designated AT community, they have like a day in September where they bring the trail to this park, and they have the Forest Service there, and they have some other events and activities. And I think the more you kind of share those experiences with people, and yes, the thru hikers are what everybody always asks about.
Sure.
But the people that are, drawn to that story, a lot of them are day hikers. So how do you get the day hikers, or the people coming up for the weekend who might have, around here, we have people with second homes who come and ski. Like, how do you connect them to the land here? Yes. A little better.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So
yeah, interesting.
So
now, as I said to you, I'm a member of the class of 2019, and I'm slightly reluctant to ask you this because, as you said, you're opinionated. But what is your message? Do you have a message to the class of 2019?
I don't know. I still. Boy, that's a big one.
What would you like to see? Would you like to see any easily made changes to the people who are coming through the trail this year?
I just think sometimes being aware of, like, just take your time. Like, it's not a lot of people like, I'm going to get through Connecticut in a day. Like, Connecticut actually is really cool. Like, slow down. Sometimes it's okay to slow down and like appreciate where you are. Even if, some days I get that hiking, you're like, oh, another day. Oh my God. Like, you have different goal, hiking fast might be your goal for that day, but like really see what's around you. And, when you connect with try to connect with the landscape a little differently.
That is totally what I think about this year. I'm starting very early this year. I started on the 22nd of March when I went first time. I'm going to start on the 26th of February this time. And that's quite early, but it's because I want to take my time. I want to really relish this trip this time. I feel that it almost feels like a race is on once you get past New York. You know, you're racing to Katahdin. And I certainly felt I was first time, and I hope I'm able to slow down this time.
And that's the other thing too, is once a lot of people get to Vermont, they are like, okay, I've got 3 more states. And then they start getting lazy. And that is when you're leaving your garbage in a bag in the middle of the North Main woods and expecting someone to pick it up,
totally
or
agree.
you're starting a fire in a bunch of duff on a rocky ledge that someone who's hiking has to put out with the last bit of their water from their water bottle, which happened, that happened to me. Like, maybe you should take a break from hiking because you're kind of doing some things that
because you're being an idiot. Is what you want to say.
It's very disrespectful. And the people that are out there taking care of the trail, you got to set a good example. And if you're not going to set a good example, or you're going to deny that you know these rules and or just the guidelines, the amount of time you put into hiking the trail, imagine if you've never done the maintenance of the trail in the corridor, imagine the amount of time that someone's put in working to keep that going and working for free to allow you to be there.
You know what? You've almost stolen my thunder, because I want to finish with this. This is lastly, because while you were terribly modest about in your email to me, I'd really like to thank you on behalf of the class of 2019 as we make our way out there this year. Because without the work you and loads of other people have done and the care you've given the AT, we just wouldn't be able to step on the trail this year, because there wouldn't be a trail without you and so many others. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
It's such a cool conservation. If you think of the AT as the biggest conservation project along the East Coast, because that's what it is.
Sure.
It is really cool to think about. And the more you learn about it, I went to Pennsylvania, pretty close to Boiling Springs this past October for a wedding.
Mm-hmm.
October is hawk migration season near the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. Hawks, AT Journals had a cool article about it, but hawks use that whole ridge to migrate. In Vermont, songbirds come and use the Green Mountains. The migratory songbirds that live in South America, they breed in Vermont. When you're on the top of the fire tower at Stratton Mountain, you're hearing, if you're there in June, July, you're hearing a thrush, the Bicknell's thrush. You're hearing a bird that you might only hear there and 1-2 places in New Hampshire. So it is just really a unique place. It's our national park, and it's really cool.
Yeah, well, look,
I think
I'm glad it's taken a long time for us to get this conversation together.
Sorry,
and I'm not blaming you at all. I'm not blaming you at all. But I'm delighted that we did, and I mean what I say. I've rarely had the chance to thank a trail maintainer and somebody who's done so much for the trail. So I really do mean it, and I really appreciate you talking to us. So hopefully I'll meet you on the trail sometime.
Yeah, I will be in southern Vermont unless for some reason I decide to quit my job, which won't happen. But I'll be right near Kelly Stan Road. I probably shouldn't tell everybody this. So then I'm going to get all those text messages that I might. Anyway, I am really close to the trail for work, which is really cool.
Cool. How nice. All right. Well, good talking to you. And hopefully I will see you on the trail this year. All right?
Yeah. Let me know.
Okay. Bye then.
Bye-bye.
Now, I know that Silvia occasionally went off at tangents, but she makes so many good points, and she is so knowledgeable about trails and how they should be treated that I loved having the chance to speak with her, especially as I thought I'd lost our interview. It was funny for me to listen back to my pre-2019 hike self. I'm glad that my views about other hikers didn't change that much when I was on the trail last year. Now, I know that I've been mentioning support for the show recently, with the donate button on my Mighty Blue on the AT podcast page seemingly unfindable for some people. And I'm not blaming them, by the way. It's not exactly out there, is it? But I wanted to thank those of you who have stepped up to support the show. Several people have actually sent checks, and imagine my delight and shock last week when I opened a check for $250. It was from a guy named Barry. I'm not going to give you his full name as he hasn't given me permission. I called to thank him, but I had to leave a message. Barry, that gift for the show really meant a lot to me, so thank you, not only for your check, but for the kind words that accompanied the check. So, having met Silvia, now let's meet Jess Treat, who knows Silvia well. Here's Jess. I'd like to introduce you to a lady who runs one of the coziest places to stay on the AT. This is Jess Treat. Hi, Jess. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Well, now, I stayed at your home back in 2014 when one of your friends was covering with you because I believe you were away. And I returned there this year because I hiked again and I met you for the first time. How long have you actually been letting hikers stay at your home?
So I think I'll be starting I'm either going into my 9th or 10th year. I have to keep better count, but it's probably 9 years.
Right. And why did you get round to doing that in the first place? Was there, because you're not right by the trail, are you? Not directly by the trail.
Well, no, not directly. I'm 3.5 miles.
Right.
So it's not too far, but it does generally require a pickup and drop off. So it's not next door. I got started really for 2 reasons. One, I moved up to Sheffield, Massachusetts from Salisbury, Connecticut in 2008. It was. So at that time, I was just always giving, during the summer hiking season, I was always giving hikers rides from the Sheffield Trail to Route 7 into Great Barrington.
Right.
And so because my policy has always been to pick up hitchhikers because I come from an era where we used to hitch and I know what it's like to wait for a ride. So I was giving hikers rides into Great Barrington all the time. And then after a couple of years, my son was in college and I had more room in the house and I thought that I might start putting up hikers in the house. And I asked a hiker how I would go about doing that. And he said I should list myself in the Thru-Hiker's Companion.
Right.
And so, at that time, even then, only about 10% or 20% of hikers used it. So what happened was it was a slow trickle of a beginning, but that was probably just right for me. And then AWOL found out about me and I found out about his guide and then all sorts of other websites as well.
Yeah.
But in telling the story, I should also say that I was influenced by, there's 2 women in Salisbury who let hikers into their home. And I had met one of them long before I moved up to Sheffield. Vanessa is the aunt of a friend of mine. And so that was my first notion of someone who put up hikers in her house. I thought, oh, how strange and interesting. And I guess I just filed that away. And,
strange,
so I think
strange is definitely the word. There's no question about that.
Well, I did grow up in a hiking family. While I never hiked the AT myself, but both my brother and father did the long trail in Vermont. And, we just were always hiking. So I'm very familiar with the culture, or it's comfortable with the culture, I guess.
Oh, that kind of explains, because you kind of shocked me when you said you used to pick up hitchhikers anyway, because I know that the attitude towards hitchhikers must have changed, I'm sure, over the years. Certainly in the UK, people just don't do it anymore because it's regarded as too darn dangerous.
I know. No, it's true. So I'm unusual in that regard. But, I grew up in the 70s and, that's what we did. And I was in college and you'd hitch from campus into town. You would just hitch long or short. But attitudes toward it changed, and understandably. Yeah. But, my experience has been, okay, I'll pass up 1 or 2 very sketchy people. But in general, someone's just trying to get from A to B. That's it. Their car's in the shop or...
You're right.
And in the case of hikers, it's obvious they've got their packs on. They need to.
But we all look sketchy. So. All of us look pretty sketchy by the time we get off the trail, don't we?
Well, I don't. No, I would say don't look sketchy so much but woodsy, yes.
Woodsy. Okay. Now you don't regard yourself as a hostel as such. So how do you make the distinction between what you provide and what others do?
Because I'm just offering a place to stay in my house. I haven't incorporated into a business, with a website and so on and so forth. As I said, I modeled myself on the 2 women in Salisbury who do the same. Yeah. So there aren't as many, well, we do have a hostel in Northwest Connecticut, but it seems there aren't as many real true hostels as you get north.
Yes.
But you have people like myself filling in the gaps.
Right. So. And how many people can you accommodate every night?
All right. Well, I've got 8 beds, and 3 or 4 of those are double, queen or king beds.
Yeah.
And so the most I've put up in the house is generally around 10 to 11.
Right.
That would be a full house.
Right. You know, Trigger. I was with a guy called Trigger, and we shared a double room. Do people camp outside? I really don't recall that I saw anybody camping outside.
All right. So that's an example of how things have changed.
Right.
So when I first started opening my house, I also offered camping because I wanted to offer, a really economical alternative for people on a strict budget.
Sure.
And there wasn't anything else around. And so I would get a lot of tenters. Then the Great Barrington Berkshire Community Center, it's called, the exact name is Berkshire Community Regional Center. I don't know. It's like a Y. They began to offer tenting, at a small fee. I think for $7 you can use the facility. So it's quite nice.
Yeah.
So most tenters go there now. Understandably, you're in Great Barrington.
Yes.
On Monday night, there's a community dinner, so it's quite nice. But they don't allow pets, so I still get tenters who have a pet, and a dog or what have you.
All right. So do you, by and large, enjoy the influx of hikers during the season? Is this something you're enjoying? Because you seem to be very happy to be around us all when we were there. So how do you feel about it all?
Yeah, well, I do enjoy it. I enjoy meeting people, and hikers are so varied in terms of their backgrounds, their professions, or where they are in life, and where they come from in the country and in the world. So I do enjoy it. I probably couldn't do it if it were a year-round thing, because it's nice to have a break too.
Of course.
But things get busy and kind of exciting, and so I like that.
And have you noticed much changes in hikers' attitudes over the years, or do you see pretty much the same that you've seen since you first started?
So I would say the demeanor and attitude, I see pretty much the same. I find that hikers are incredibly grateful for everything you have to offer, whether it's a hot shower or a comfortable bed. Yeah. And, I always tell people I have no interest in running a B&B. Right. Because, you get some high maintenance people, but hikers are so grateful and very expressive of that gratitude. So I really enjoy that. I would say I haven't seen a change in demeanor. I've seen other changes, but then not so much in that direction.
So what other changes have you seen then?
Well, the season has gotten longer, quite a bit longer. And, it starts sooner and it ends later. And that, of course, has to do with the fact that, there's such a huge number of people, through hikers, going from Georgia to Maine at the same time. And so they're encouraged now to flip-flop and do other creative things.
When did you get your first one this year then? Or last year? When did you get, what time of the year did you get your first one last year?
Gosh, I have a log, and I'm not home right now to check it. Right. It was it might have been March. No, it couldn't have been. It might have been early May. I think it was early May.
Wow, that's something.
Very early May. Does that sound right? They had started.
It sounds ridiculous
February.
to me. I started in February, and I got nowhere near there in May, but I was pretty slow. So,
well, I suddenly had 5 through hikers who needed to stay the night. It was just highly unusual at that time of year. But what happened is we had a freak snowfall.
Wow.
And it was bitterly cold, and they were out on that ridge that's between Salisbury and Sheffield.
Yes.
And they just needed to get warm. So it was really kind of fun.
Yeah.
Because I don't usually have that many at that time of year. And all of a sudden I had this flurry of activity.
So when you actually open from them? So from May? So
I don't technically ever close, but it's as I can accommodate people, I do.
Okay.
I haven't retired yet, so I do have a full-time job. It's an academic job, so I have my summers off. So if people are coming in and, section hikers, I would say we have more section hikers as time goes on than I've seen before. That's another change. So section hikers might be calling me about staying in March and April and so forth, where I'm still teaching.
Okay.
But as much as I can, I try to accommodate. And as you saw, I have friends to help out when I can't.
Yes.
Too.
So if listeners want to stay, how do they get in contact with you? You're still in are you in Gut Hooks as well as the Through Hikers book?
Yeah, I'm in Gut Hooks. Yes, absolutely. Right. Gut Hooks and AWOL's Guide, and there's websites and Thru-Hiker's Companion.
Cool.
I don't even know all the places that I've listed online.
I'm sure.
I think there's ones I don't know about.
Well, I'm taking the chance every time I speak to you at the homes of where I stayed last year to thank you because your hospitality was great.
I very much remember having you. It was wonderful. And,
it was fun. It was fun.
And the other thing I remember is I had a hiker who was on your podcast who had to go to the library in order to do that, and that was a lot of fun.
Who was that?
Too. She's the niece of
Earl Schaefer.
Of
Earl Schaefer.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Echo.
That's right. Yes.
Echo. Yeah.
Yeah, very charming young woman. She really was. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, look, as I say, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I appreciate it. And if I ever went for a third time, which is unlikely, but if I ever went for a third time, I'd stay there again. So thanks so much.
Oh, you're always welcome. Welcome. Thanks.
Okay. Cheers then. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That house is so calm, so comfortable, and both Trig and I really enjoyed it there. It was a treat to hear from Jess. That's pretty much the end of my section on hostels that I stayed at, though next week's main guest will be the proprietor of my very favourite hostel on the trail. We've got Neville Harris of Woods Hole, and, well, Neville is nothing if not chatty. Our normal 15-minute section on hostels was never going to be sufficient for Neville, and our chat turned into a full-on conversation about the history of Woods Hole and Neville's difficulties with the changing circumstances during 2019. And while I'm talking about the middle section of the show here, I asked for suggestions last week as to what you'd like to see there. Keep them coming because you've given me several good ideas. However, I've made up my mind with what I'm going to do. Do you remember Kate Stillwell, the woman of a certain age who I was going to feature in a new podcast? Well, I've decided, having spoken through it with Kate, that both my show and she would be better served by including her journey in the Mighty Blue podcast. This will be in much the same way that I covered Jessa or Addie. Remember, she did a hike a few years ago. Kate is starting her flip-flop in April, so we'll start including her preparations in March. The other new show with Ryan Hopkins, JR Hikes the Appalachian Trail, will still be its own podcast, and that will be available from February the 1st. I hope that all made sense and hope that you will support my decision, as well as listen to Ryan's show and both our other shows. The Trail Danes podcast is now 4 times a month, as is Jester Section Hiker, where Julie or Jester has been overwhelmed by the support and number of people wanting to be on the show. We started out with just 2 shows a month, but with so many options, we've decided to add those extra shows. She is speaking to people from many trails as well as the Appalachian Trail. So watch out for all that the Hiking Radio Network is offering. So hopefully you're all caught up now and we can move on to Paul Stutzman's Hiking Through, where the fun is really about to begin as Paul crosses the Connecticut River and enters New Hampshire. I'll see you next week. Chapter 21, Golden Days. 1 mile after making my promise to God atop F's Lookout, I claimed Vermont as my 12th state. In the Green Mountain State, the AT follows the Long Trail, the first long-distance trail ever constructed running the length of Vermont and from the Massachusetts border on the south to the Canadian border on the north. The AT and the LT run together for 100 miles over many of the summits and high ridges of the Green Mountains. Near Killington, the 2 trails split. The Appalachian Trail heads east to New Hampshire and the Long Trail continues north to Canada. The day was hot, but trail conditions were not too difficult. 18 miles into the new state, the trail crossed Route 9, and I met my first Vermont trail magic. At a parking area, 2 former hikers invited me to raid a cooler filled with soft drinks. 2 cans of pop and 3 bags of snacks propelled me forward with a new burst of energy. One of my goals on this trek was to hike 1 day of 30 miles or more. This seemed like a good day to do it. At 7 in the evening, I arrived at Goddard's Shelter, in a lovely setting close to the summit of Glastonbury Mountain. Towering pines surrounded the shelter, and a crystal-clear spring flowed only a few feet away. I'd already hiked 28.5 miles, and the next shelter was 4 miles away. Those 4 miles would put my day well over my 30-mile goal. At Goddard, 3 section hikers had set up their tents outside the shelter, and generously told me I could set up mine inside if I wished. I debated. How important was that goal of 30 miles? One of the hikers talked proudly of the long and hard 18 miles he'd done that day. "How far did you hike today?" he asked me. I paused for dramatic effect, and then tried to answer nonchalantly, 28.5 miles. "Wow, are you a thru hiker?" "Yes, I am." I've just passed the 1,600-mile mark today. Hey guys, he yelled to his buddies. Get over here. This guy hiked over 28 miles today and 1,600 on the trail. I was a celebrity. The importance of making those 30 miles receded as the 3 hikers gathered around and listened to my stories. That morning, I'd asked God to send interesting people into my life that day. Now here they were, even if they were only interested in what I'd done. The simple pleasures of the evening, good conversation, a cold and clear spring, a shelter nestled in the pines, convinced me that I was done hiking for the day. With the evening light slanting through the trees, I set up my tent inside Goddard's shelter and cooked my meal. The soft sounds of swaying pines lulled me to sleep. I never achieved my goal of 30 miles, and I have no regrets. The section hikers never stirred as I left Goddard's shelter at the first hint of morning light. I managed only 19 tiring miles that day. In the Green Mountain National Forest, I trudged up Stratton Mountain. On the summit, I climbed even farther, scrambling to the top of a fire tower to take in the stunning vista of mountains dotted with ski slopes. That night, I stood on the shore of Stratton Pond and soaked up the peaceful mood created by placid waters reflecting the surrounding mountains. Stratton Pond shelter was a newer A-frame construction with an extended roof that protected several benches and a picnic table. For several hours, I had the shelter to myself. At dusk, another hiker showed up. The young man's mother had recently passed away, and our conversation reminded me of the pain of my children's loss. Our shared sadness and reminiscing was interrupted by a new member of the hiking community who came running at full speed towards the shelter. He carried no food or water. As he approached the few steps leading to the front of the shelter and prepared to leap inside, the young man and I both yelled, "Stop!" The German Shepherd obediently stopped. We expected a hiker to arrive and claim him, but no one else appeared. The dog wore a collar with no tags. We took compassion on this traveller and fed him, but never allowed him inside the shelter. He was obviously well trained and obeyed our commands to stay outside. At least he obeyed until we were asleep. When I woke the next morning, the dog was lying beside my bunk. Perhaps I had needed a guardian that night. My next hiking partner would be a German Shepherd. The young hiker left the shelter shortly before I did in the morning, and I encouraged the dog to follow him. No luck. He was obviously waiting for me. I did not wish to be responsible for a dog on the trail. The shepherd, however, seemed to think he was responsible for me. All morning he stayed with me, leading the way. Occasionally he glanced back to make certain I was keeping up. Several times I darted down a side trail in hopes of losing him, but the dog turned back and found me again every time. I stopped to filter water from the stream. He drank too, and then plopped down in the water just upstream from me. That put an end to my filtering. I still had a small supply of water left and didn't relish the thought of drinking dog-flavoured water. Early in the afternoon, the trail crossed Vermont Route 11/30 and cut through a parking area before entering the woods again. The summer day had heated up. I was hot and thirsty and needed to find more water soon. But I spotted relief. A half-full or half-empty, depending on your point of view, 2-litre bottle of Diet Coke lay in a ditch alongside the parking area. I sniffed the contents briefly and then, much to my own disbelief, quickly guzzled down the warm liquid. A partial sheet of plywood lay along the roadside, probably blown off a passing truck. I pulled it from the weeds and stretched out on it for a short break. My trusty canine companion rested nearby. We lounged contentedly, only half conscious. A car door slammed and a well-known voice roused me. "Hey there, Apostle! That's a good-looking partner with you there, don't you know? And where'd you get the soda?" "Fargo." He had taken a quick hitch into Manchester Centre, several miles west, to resupply, and was now returning to the trail. "If I knew I was meeting you here, I'd have saved some Diet Coke for you. This dog showed up at the shelter last night, and now I can't get him to leave my side." Fargo's ride had not yet left the parking area, so we convinced him to take the German Shepherd back into town. We coaxed it into the back seat, and it pressed a sad face to the rear window, watching me walk away with Fargo. But when the driver opened his door to enter the car, the dog jumped out and soon caught up with us. Once again, we returned to the parking area, happy to find the driver waiting. This time, both dog and driver stayed in the car as we made our escape. If that dog had stayed with me for several days, I probably couldn't have sent him away. I'd already been thinking of names for him. I was glad that his life did improve as a result of meeting me. Another hiker told me later that he had been at the local outfitter when the driver brought the dog to town, and someone at the store had offered to adopt him. Back in Manchester Centre, Vermont, someone has a very loyal dog who was my protector for a day. It was good to have another human to talk with again. We covered just about every subject you could imagine on our stroll through the woods. There were a few hours every afternoon, though, when Fargo was silent. Those were the hours he spent with his headphones on, listening to National Public Radio. During those hours, I had the woods and my thoughts to myself. If anything important happened in the world, Fargo gave me an update. I had ample warning of the thunderstorm rolling over White Rock Mountain, but I foolishly kept walking instead of donning rain gear. The downpour soon pummeled me. I squeezed myself under a small spruce, but it gave little shelter. By the time we arrived at White Rock's cliff, I was cold and shivering. I called a hostel in Rutland and made reservations to be warm and dry. The Back Home Again hostel in downtown Rutland is run by the 12 Tribes community, a religious group living a communal lifestyle. The 12 tribes attempt to replicate the early church as it is described in the New Testament book of Acts. In the early 1970s, Albert Spriggs and his wife had a ministry in Chattanooga, Tennessee, working with several different denominations. One Sunday evening, he arrived at church and was dismayed to find it cancelled due to the Super Bowl. His solution was to form his own church, calling it the Vine Community Church and meeting in a local park. Later, that church evolved into the 12 Tribes, the Commonwealth of Israel. The members of the community take on Hebrew names and all resources are pooled and distributed as needed. The women dress plainly and the men wear beards. Except for the ponytails on many of the men, these people look very much like the plain folks of my community. From White Rock's cliff, I also called Abner and Virginia, old acquaintances of our family who now live near Rutland. They knew of my hike and had offered to treat me to a meal whenever I passed through. I took them up on the offer and we ate at a nearby cafe, also run by the 12 Tribes. Abner and Virginia were amazed at my appetite, and I'm sure the 12 Tribes appreciated the large bill my friends cheerfully paid at the end of the evening. Some consider the 12 Tribes a cult, but their hostel offered us warm beds, hot showers, and friendly hospitality. One of the community members also gave me another nugget to ponder. When we stopped going to church and started being the church, he told me, something wonderful happened. A community member drove us back to the trail in the morning. Good food and warm beds had rejuvenated us, and we were ready for whatever surprises Vermont had waiting up the trail. The first surprise was more trail magic. The night before, I'd been craving for Mountain Dew. I walked the short distance from downtown Rutland to a Walmart, where I'd spotted a pop machine outside. The machine took my money but refused to give up the can of soda. Walmart was already closed, so I had no choice but to go back to my room with my craving unsatisfied. Soon after getting back on the trail the next morning, we found a cooler and a box of snacks waiting in a clearing in the woods. A white plastic chair was provided for any weary hiker needing a break. I opened the cooler, and there was a block of ice surrounded by cans of Mountain Dew and Pepsi. I might have overdone it just a little. After several Hostess Twinkies and 3 cans of soda on top of the morning's coffee, I had 27 teaspoons of sugar in my system. I was a rocket, fueled for takeoff. I burned through my sugar bars and 19 miles in record time and left Fargo far behind, but we had planned our stop for the night and we'd meet at the end of the day. At one time, the Appalachian Trail passed through Killington just across from the inn at Long Trail. This inn caters to skiers and hikers and is a must-stop for many because of its authentic Irish pub and dining room. The dining room is actually built around a large boulder that juts into one side of the room. Where you expect to see a wall, you're faced with a huge stone outcropping. The AT was rerouted when a ski resort purchased the land the trail crossed. Now the trail passes Killington west of town. When I came to US 4, I took the short walk to the inn, wanting to make this well-known stop. I walked in and admired the hardwood floors, the fieldstone fireplace, and the rustic interior. And at the bar, a familiar face sat grinning at me. "Hey there, Apostle. Where you been?" The last I'd seen Fargo, he was disappearing in my sugar buzz dust. "Fargo, how'd you beat me here?" "I took that other trail up there, the one that goes through the ski resort." You blue-blazing cheesehead. Fargo had found the old AT and gone across the ski resort property to cut off several miles. Fargo, when you summit Mount Katahdin, assuming you do before the missus calls you home, you'll be thinking about all these miles of AT you missed. Believe you me, Apostle, that was the traditional route I hiked to get here, and when I'm on that Mount Katahdin, I'll just be glad that I finally got there. The inn's French onion soup and shepherd's pie were just as delicious as the hiker grapevine had promised, and we spent an enjoyable evening lounging about the inn. Fargo rummaged through the hiker box and found a 16-ounce can of Spam. He didn't want to carry an extra pound of weight, so he offered the can to me. I accepted, thinking it might be a unique meal the next evening. But let me tell you, folks, just as wading through lots of spam and junk email on your computer can be unpleasant, So he's trying to eat a whole pound of spam at one meal. The next night at the Winturi shelter, I finished my usual hot meal and then unveiled my can of spam, much to the amusement of other shelter guests. My little folding camp knife sliced the chunk of mystery meat. Then I dropped each slice back into the bottom of the can and fried it on the stove, piece by piece. The first slice was delicious. The second slice was good, the third slice was tolerable, and the fourth slice was forced down. I had eaten only half of the meat. "Hey Fargo, you want the rest?" He eagerly accepted, and then I saw his little plot. I'm sure he realised back at the inn that no one could eat that much spam at one sitting, and now he thanked me for carrying it all day for him. The next night would be our last in Vermont, and as Fargo and I neared Happy Hill Shelter, a wonderful aroma drifted through the trees. A group of section hikers were grilling hamburgers over a fire. We didn't even attempt subtlety. "Hey guys, you have any extra hamburgers for two tired and hungry thru-hikers?" A fair exchange was arranged. Several fat and juicy hamburgers were traded for several hours of trail stories. The next morning we hiked 6 easy miles, passed under I-91 near Norwich and crossed the Connecticut River. Halfway across the concrete bridge, an embedded marker declared that we had entered our 13th state, New Hampshire. West Wheelock Street led us toward downtown Hanover and Dartmouth College. Dartmouth was founded in 1769 by a Puritan minister for the purpose of evangelizing Native Americans and then sending them out as missionaries. I doubted that many missionaries were still being produced at this elite Ivy League school. Every year, over 16,000 students apply for admission, and about 1,000 are accepted. Becoming a missionary is more difficult than it used to be. Many had called, but few were chosen. The hiker rate at the local inn was a mere $250 per night, so we flagged a taxi and headed out of town to a more reasonable roadhouse. Fargo had a mail drop arriving in the morning, and while he waited for the post office to open, I ran across the street to a pharmacy. I had decided to buy a little radio and headphones. Why get my news filtered through Fargo when I could hear it firsthand? For the next several days I hiked with my new companion. Instead of conversing with the Boy Scout troop and their sponsors at Moose Mountain Shelter, I lay in my tent connected with the outside world. I was a well-informed hiker, traversing those first mountains in New Hampshire. I conquered Moose Mountain, Smarts Mountain, Mount Cube and Mount Mist, all while enduring information overload. But something was wrong. Out here in the woods, this toy was destroying my newfound freedom. I no longer heard my footsteps on the pine needles, or the birds singing, or the wind rustling through the trees. Sure, the Golden Oldies station was playing my kind of music. Bob Dylan and Crosby, Stills and Nash reminded me of my past. But somehow I was being robbed of the present. I had traded the joy of nature and conversing with God for a little radio clipped to my backpack. The radio had to go. I stashed the radio at the bottom of my pack and returned to living. If the world fell apart, Fargo would surely let me know. I heard the ribbons of birdsong in the forest and the snap of a small branch under my foot. My music, my distraction, was the clicking of my poles and the sighing of the wind. Thank you, God, for your beautiful creation. Welcome back, Apostle.